I came across a question asked by a would-be nomad capitalist who asked, what is the cheapest and safest country in the world to live in? Now we've got two factors here that we're going to discuss. Number one is where can you live affordably and get a better value for your money? But also where can you do that and be safe? A lot of people think that those two things don't go together. I'm going to walk you through actual statistics and real life experience today and explain why they can go well together and answer where you can live cheaply and safely. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson here at Nomad Capitalist. We help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs legally reduce their taxes, grow their options with second citizenships, invest in new boom markets around the world. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And this is a question that I've been asked a lot over the years. People want to know, on one hand, where can I go where it's cheaper to live? I want to get more value for my money. I'm tired of living in a Western country where everything is so expensive, especially for my friends in Australia who are paying $30 for a pack of cigarettes and huge duties on alcohol, and many of you who have very expensive lifestyles. Cheap is one side, value is one side, but on the other side, I want to make sure that I'm safe because there's so much prejudice, particularly in the West. If you turn on your television about how everywhere else in the world is unsafe, you have to stay at home. Remember a couple years ago when the US State Department came out and said, travel warning, every single country in the world is unsafe right now. Don't leave anywhere. No. If I had a government that took half of people's money and spent it on a bunch of stupid stuff, I guess I wouldn't want anyone to leave either. But of course there are places where you can go, you can get a better value, and you can also be safe. And so what I would tell you is, safe can be anywhere and cheap is subjective. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He lives in Chicago, and if you've seen some of the stuff that happens in Chicago, you'll have dozens of people some weekends being killed. I mean, really sad stuff. And he's very quick to point out, I don't live in the part of Chicago where people are being killed. I live in the suburbs. You don't have to worry about it. Well, here's the reality. Okay, there are suburbs of Mexico City. There are suburbs of Sao Paulo, of Dhaka, of pretty much anywhere that you want where you can also be safe. So when you turn on your television and you see, somebody had their head chopped off in Guadalajara, there are plenty of people who live in Guadalajara who live in these safe parts. And so that's where you may want to go. When it comes to cheap, of course, my philosophy is not, how do I live for $9 a day, but how am I getting better value for my money? And so my perspective on the cheap part, to start off there, is if you're looking for a westernized quality of life, you're probably going to get some of the absolute cheapest prices in parts of Eastern Europe. So we've talked a lot about Belgrade, we've talked about Tbilisi, Yerevan, Minsk and Belarus. These are places that are really cheap, partially because they use their own currency, which keeps prices lower. Montenegro, where I have a summer home, it's really not that cheap, partially because they use the euro, partially because they have a lot of tourism. But these lesser visited places with their own currencies that are off the beaten track to a certain extent, you're going to get a great value, particularly if you drink, because there are some places where alcohol is really expensive. But if you want great food, if you want great dining, coffee, those kind of places are going to be good. And also cities near those, so Novi Sad, for example, in Belgrade. Budapest is a place that I think could be relatively affordable if you want to be within the European Union. So that's probably a great place. Certainly, you could apply some of the same principles to Central and South America. Sometimes the tiniest of countries, like if you go to a Caribbean island, things are not going to be as cheap. So sometimes tiny countries, if you want certain Western creature comforts, are going to cost more. So if you're going to Honduras, for example, it may not be as cheap as you'd expect. Colombia, Ecuador, I think definitely some great deals there. Colombia, again, has a currency that never seems to hold its weight that well, but great place to live, great value. And then, of course, Southeast Asia, places like Malaysia, similar issues with the currency. Countries like Thailand, Cambodia, which is a dollarized economy, not as cheap as you might expect. So I'm looking at Malaysia as one of the cheapest places, quite frankly. Again, if we're looking to have some kind of westernized lifestyle, some kind of consumer conveniences, certainly living in rural Laos can be cheap, but so can living in rural West Virginia. Okay, so that's what I would look at in terms of cheap. Now, you might say, okay, are those places safe? Are those three main pockets that we identified safe? If we're looking at Latin America, primarily kind of northern South America, Eastern and Southeast Europe, the Caucasus, and Southeast Asia. Are we going to be safe here? Now, I'm always looking at these new studies and reports that come out, and you may see these in the headlines where they say these are the 10 safest countries in the world. I came across one recently they talked about on CNN. Okay. Remarkably, all 10 of the countries were basically European or Western countries. It was Iceland, it was Sweden, it was all these different countries. And what really amazes me is I actually found one of these reports where they basically admitted, they said, these are the safest countries based on perception. And since these reports are all put together by a bunch of think tanks, by white guys sitting in Washington or London or Vienna, what is their natural bias? Their natural bias is, we know Iceland, that seems pretty safe. But have they ever thought about the countries that I'm talking about? Well, if you actually look at the statistics, they put out for 2020, 129 countries they were able to rank based on actual crime data. The safest country in the world out of these 129 was Qatar. Now, is Qatar particularly cheap? No. It is a very tax-friendly country for sure, but let's go a couple down the list. 1 or 2 spots below Qatar was Taiwan. Taiwan, not as cheap as some of the places, but relatively affordable, good value for the money. It's often overlooked place in Asia. Then you keep going up the list. In the top 10, Georgia. Then you keep going up the list. Barely out of the top 10, Armenia. Then you get to Slovenia, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia. These are all at about the top 25, okay, with Georgia on this list being among the safest. I've been in Georgia for a long time. I know a lot of people who have moved to Georgia from other parts of the world, and everyone in Georgia has a story of they leave their fancy camera in the back of a taxi, the guy tracks them down and gives them their camera back. People feel safe walking around at all hours of the day and night. That's just how it works. They've created a very safe culture, thanks in part to Mikhail Saakashvili, who former president, speaking at our upcoming conference, really changed the culture and made a country that was about people feeling safe. Now, what do all these countries also have in common? They also outrank the countries that you would expect to be the safest, perhaps the countries where you live in. New Zealand, Australia, the United Kingdom, and far down the list, the United States. All the countries I mentioned beat them. Now, Serbia did not make the top 25. Montenegro did not make the top 25, but pretty much all the Eastern European countries, with 1 or 2 exceptions, Moldova, for example, they all beat the big Western countries, the CUNA countries, as we call them. The United States came on the ranking as the 50th most dangerous country. Now, again, go back to what I initially said. Safety can be found anywhere. I'm not saying you can't find places to live in the United States where you're safe. I lived in the U.S. I had a couple times my car was broken into or had some problems. Obviously, I was not a victim of any kind of serious crime. If I would have gone certain places, I could have been. But that same rule applies anywhere else. And again, the challenge is the places where most people want to go from the Western world, Barcelona, for example, is now widely accepted as the crime capital of Europe. I've had multiple people that I've worked with have guys come up, take their expensive watches, run off. So the places that you think are safe may not be the safest. Other places that aren't exactly cheap that are safe, a lot of the countries in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, for example, the United Arab Emirates, you're not getting away with too much crime there. Belarus was also on the list of some of the safest places. Now, you can argue in some of these cases they're really imposing pretty strict law and order. I would argue in places like Georgia, that's not so much the case. The police are pretty friendly to deal with. And so you can find cheap, you can find safe. I would say that Eastern Europe, if you want both, is a great place. Again, I mentioned Serbia, I mentioned Belarus, Georgia. I think Armenia is also pretty safe. Those are great places to go. Certainly, if you know what you're doing in Asia, Taiwan is super safe. Places like Malaysia can be super safe. Not a lot of violent crime in a lot of Southeast Asia. Maybe there's some purse snatching occasionally. You got to watch yourself. Certainly in parts of Latin America, a bit more dangerous. But again, I've said, you know what? If you buy in the right neighborhood, if you live in the right neighborhood, you'll be fine. You take the right precautions. Perhaps more precautions to take there. But the point is, you can have a lifestyle where you're getting a lot of value. And I'm not talking, again, about where do I get a 25-cent beer. I'm talking about where do I go and live a great life where I'm getting much more value for my money. I'm having that fine dining experience for a third of the price of what I would pay in New York City or London or Sydney. And I'm also doing so in a place that's more safe. Better quality of life, more safety. It does exist. The statistics you're seeing in the Western news media are biased towards the West. They ignore the countries we talk about. I think you should go where you're treated best and find the best of both of these worlds. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.